For those of you who don't know Phil, he's the CEO of Orlando International and the executive airport. He is overseeing some $3.8 billion of capital improvements out of OIA. He's going to talk to us about that. He's been in the business in his career spans 40 years, let me correct that. He's Deputy Executive Director of the Aviation Authority. In the early 90s, he was an administrative assistant at the county. Then he came back to OIA in 2008. I will not go into his educational background since Mr. Tyke did it so eloquently. And let me just ask Phil to come up and explain the pigs to us. Will you, Phil?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Now that's like for a carrying job to be here, okay? I've been here before. Not here, but I've been in front of you before. Thank you for the opportunity. And actually, it wasn't so much the pigs, is that when I graduated, I got shoes. But that hampered me because I couldn't count anymore. Tom has always been a jewel to remember that, and always having been a Gator, much to my dismay, my son, I have a son that's a Gator too. I also have one that's a UCF Knight, but it's always a pleasure to listen to all of you. I know many of you appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on at Orlando International primarily, but Orlando Executive. We've been through some changes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we focus on at the airport, which is connecting the journey, because in aviation, as well as any form of transportation, it's about making those connections. So at Orlando International, who are we? Well, we're a community gateway, and what we've done for a number of years, going back to the days before we built the terminal we're operating in now, is trying to create a sense of place. I guess the most succinct way that I can describe it is that what we look at in terms of designing a terminal is bringing the outside in. We live in a great place in Central Florida, and a lot of people have recognized that because for years we have been the most visited destination in the United States. And the reason that people come here is they enjoy not only the opportunities and the leisure opportunities we have, but they enjoy going out and seeing all the wonderful natural beauty that you have in Central Florida. We've also been an economic resource. Pre-pandemic, Florida Department of Transportation did an economic analysis of airports, commercial service airports in the state of Florida. And Orlando International had an economic impact of about $41 billion. So we were the largest in the state in terms of that. All together, all of the 19 or so commercial service airports accounted for about $175 billion worth of economic impact. And so that's a combination of the direct spend of visitors coming here and the multiplier effect of when they spend money, how it works out its way through the Central Florida economy. And we've been a global connector. We've had, and we're on their way back, but we've had up to 1.60 international nonstop routes. We have not as many now, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We still have some, but we've had for years the most nonstop destinations, both domestically and internationally combined in the state. We've been the busiest airport in the state. And so when I'm saying we're a global connector, we have people that have flown here from Dubai. We have direct service, which is scheduled to start back up with Emirates Airlines. But with the Dubai hub, which at one point pre-pandemic was the busiest international hub in the world, you could go one stop from Orlando to anywhere in the world. So it's been a challenge over the last couple of years. Pre-pandemic, in February of 2020, 20, our annualized passenger traffic, both flying in and flying out, was 51 million passengers. And calendar year 2019, December 2019, on an annualized basis, was 50.6 million. And we were getting prepared to celebrate that in April of 2020, when everything happened in the middle of March of 2020. I already mentioned the economic impact from the FDOT study, and we've been the largest airport rental car market in the world based on dollars and volume. And in terms of land mass, one of the things that we've enjoyed, thanks to many of my predecessors and many of the board members in the past, they had the foresight to acquire land. As you all have heard, they're not making any more land. So we had many of our board members going back into the late 80s acquired land. So we, by land mass, we're the fourth largest in the country. Dallas, Fort Worth, and Denver. Fort Myers has a lot of land, and they have actually more acreage. We sold some of our acreage off because we didn't need it in a non-contiguous parcel that was just south of the airport. But Fort Myers has a lot of theirs for mitigation purposes. In terms of activity, we far surpass Fort Myers in their activity as far as flights and the number of passengers. We have 129 food and beverage retail locations. Right now, we have about 109 of those that have reopened. It's been a challenge. It's been a challenge everywhere because labor markets are very tight. There are not enough people that are applying for jobs that are open right now, and there's a whole host of reasons I'm not going to go into, but it's very tight in the labor market, and people, companies, concessionaires in particular, rental car companies are having a hard time staffing up, and that's creating some issues for us because if you don't have enough staff, there's plenty of demand. There are plenty of people coming in and out of the airport. When I left today, I walked by the Southwest ticket counter, and they were just backed up. There are people that are flying in and out of this destination and have been for a number of months now. In fact, we've been in the top 5 busiest airports when you measure it by departing passengers that are screened by TSA for probably 7 or 8 months. For the months of December, January, February, March, we were the busiest by that measure. Now, what that doesn't take into account are connecting passengers. So in Atlanta, you've got a lot of people that are changing from one Delta plane to another Delta plane. It's the same thing in Miami, only it's American. In DFW, it's American as well. So we're not a hub for any major U.S. airline, but we have a lot of activity. And more so when you think about the population we serve in this 4-county area, about 1.4 million. So when you compare that to South Florida, which has 2 large hub airports, we do pretty well. So I always like to say we punch above our weight at Orlando International. So how do we manage? From the standpoint of the Aviation Authority, we have a board of directors. 2 of those board of directors are ex officio members, meaning they, by virtue of their positions, the mayor of Orlando, the mayor of Orange County, they serve on the board. The mayor of Orlando actually has title to the property. The city of Orlando has title to all the property we have. We operate airport under an agreement that's a 50-year agreement, was renewed in 2015, so it runs to 2065, where we, as an independent district, the Aviation Authority, operate the airport. Then we have 5 other positions, only 4 of those are filled right now, that are appointed by the governor of the state of Florida. So currently, we have a chairman, Carson Good, who lives in Winter Park, is a developer. Mayor Dyer is the vice chairman. Mayor Demings is our treasurer. We have a new board member that was appointed in March, Dr. John L. Evans, who is with Janus Capital. Craig Mateer, many of you may have known, particularly all of you lawyers may have known his father, Bill Mateer, because Bill Mateer for a long time was the general counsel of the Orlando Sentinel. And then we have Tim Weishire. Mr. Weishire is, for the most part, has been living in Osceola County. He served 8 years on the Osceola County School Board, but he recently moved to Lake Nona, so he is an Orange County resident. The one vacancy we have, by statute, we have to have a representative of a citizen from Osceola County. The governor has not made that appointment as yet. So we are operating now with 6 board members. We have to have a quorum in the building when we take action of at least 4 members, and it takes 4 members with an affirmative vote to do anything under our bylaws. So what happened in March of 2020 when Disney announced that they were shutting down? Well, immediately we got our budget folks together in the finance, and we put in a hiring freeze, which we have just recently opened back up. We froze all of the travel. Nobody was traveling. Developed a voluntary separation program because we had a lot of folks that had been there for a while, and we put together some incentives that maybe would induce them, so because we were trying to trim payroll. Because at that point in time, it was difficult to foresee how long we were going to be dealing with this pandemic and what the impact on travel was. I think the low point for us was April 15th of 2020. I remember that because the number of departing passengers was 1,579 passengers. So it was pretty lonely for a while at Orlando International. And then we started to see some signs that things were coming back. And what was interesting, the state of Florida, when you looked at Miami, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale, you looked at the daily reports the Transportation Security Administration put out, you added up, we accounted for a little over 11% of the total traffic in the country at that time. I'm happy to say that elsewhere in the country, they're starting to come back. We're fast approaching where we were 2 years ago, 2019, with 2 million passengers a day. We're not quite there yet, but for example, for a number of months, we were busier than Los Angeles International. If you have ever flown in and out of Los Angeles, you know how busy that is. They're starting to come back. Yesterday's report, we were 5th in the country. So the big hubs, Los Angeles, DFW, Atlanta, were all ahead of us. Las Vegas. Everybody, right now, there's a lot of pent-up demand to get out of the house, and a lot of people are going in and out of Las Vegas. But by the same token, there are a lot of things that we have been able to do. So over that period of time, we were at least in the top 5 just about every day. So we had folks that never left work. Operations, our first responders, we have a fire department, we have contract with OPD, operations and maintenance folks. All those folks were coming to work. We had some people that were working remotely, and that was for health purposes. But as of June 1, everybody's come back into the office. So I think everybody's, for the most part, glad to be back in. There are some people that have concerns, but we've got, I think, a strong workforce, and they work pretty hard over the last 15 months to make sure, number one, that everything was safe and clean, and number two, that it was in top running order, because we were ready when the traffic came back, and now it's coming back. We also had to make some adjustments in our capital program. At one point, it was not $3.8 billion, it was over $4 billion. But when we looked at our revenue sources that were dedicated to the expansion in the South Terminal, we knew that we weren't going to be able to collect all of that. So we made some changes, reduced the scope. We had a plan for 19 gates. We reduced that to 15. It's not been without some challenges, because you had contracts in place and we had to negotiate changes to those contracts. But from a fiscal standpoint, it was the right thing to do because we knew we couldn't afford it. Now, as we are starting to come back, thinking about how we can reinstitute some of that and look at that, but it's all going to be driven by demand. Not quite where we were before. We're probably on average now about 90% of where we were, but you really have to annualize that. So we expect that by the end of the year that we'll be hopefully around the 30 million range, if not more. But before we really look at any expansion, we're going to have to be up in that 50 million range to justify spending the dollars to expand. So we spend a lot of time on fiscal responsibility. We have some of the highest bond ratings of any airport in the country. And pictured in here is our chief financial officer and our director of finance. We've weathered the storm. A lot of the rating agencies were looking at downgrades. We only got downgraded by one, but there were 93 other airports that they downgraded at the same time. That was Standard & Poor's. And we were on the watch list for a number of the rating agencies. I'm happy to say that we've come off of that because they've seen the activity and they've seen how we've recovered up to this point. So what we've been managing over the last 15 minutes is our response to COVID. We've taken a lot of steps. We've gotten certifications from the Global Biorisk Advisory Council. That's a independent authority that looks at your procedures and your protocols for cleaning and making sure that you're doing the right things to keep the facility clean and safe. We haven't stopped marketing. We've got a marketing department that they couldn't travel, but they were on the phone on a regular basis talking to all of the airlines that fly in and out. And we've seen some results. This afternoon, I will be at an inaugural flight of Viva Air, which is a Colombian airline that will start nonstop service between Orlando and Medellin, Colombia. Several months ago, I was at the inaugural flight for Hawaiian Airlines. Who in their wildest dreams would have thought that you would have a direct flight from Orlando to Honolulu? We got that right in the middle of the pandemic. And there's others that you'll see in a minute, but that is the life's blood of the airport. That's where the economic impact comes from in large part, is the air service, people coming in and out of Orlando. A lot of it's for leisure, but there's another focus that we're working on. We have some meetings with Orlando Economic Partnership over the next couple of weeks. We're trying to drum up more business traffic because the way that long haul air service works, particularly international, is you have to have that premium pay in the front of the plane to justify, to make the profit for the airlines. So we, in addition to being a great destination for leisure activities, all of you know when you go out in the community, there are a lot of people from all parts of the world that do business here. And that's what we need to leverage more and more. Because I'm telling you, people in Miami aren't sleeping. It's been interesting to watch the last couple of months with the air service that's going to Miami. Airlines that I would never thought would go to Miami because it's a pretty expensive airport to operate in. The low-cost carriers like Spirit, Frontier, JetBlue are all flying in and out of Miami. So they're making a concerted effort to come back and be the #1 airport. Confident that we're going to focus on what we do best, which is hospitality, but we're going to have to focus on getting business traffic as well to build up, to make sure that everybody can prosper from this. Technology is going to be a key. Everything in the airport more or less runs on a chip. And all you have to do is think back 10 years. You used to print out a boarding pass. Sometimes you do it at home. Nobody does that anymore. They all carry it on their phone now. And a lot of this is processing. Contactless processing has become more and more of a focus simply because of what we've gone through in the pandemic. I mean, we've been fortunate because we've gotten the vaccines and been able to deploy those. A lot of that is through the efforts of Mayor Demings and Mayor Dyer and their crisis management during this time. But the virus is not going away. So you have to pay attention to that. And to be competitive, you're going to have to invest in technology. And we've always had to manage limited revenue sources. So we cinched up our belt. We stopped traveling. We haven't had any compensation adjustments for employees for about 2 years. Because our business model is we don't get local tax dollars. We operate on user fees. So, you know, the payments, the people getting on the plane dropped in half. Flights dropped in half. So a lot of our revenues evaporated pretty quickly. So we had to plan on that. We had to hold the line on budgets. but we also had to make sure that we were spending our dollars smartly. We're not going to skimp on cleaning, not going to skimp on security. We have to have firefighters there responding. We get calls every day. You have to have OPD there. We get calls 4 or 5 times a day from airlines wanting OPD to report to the gate because they have passenger issues. Either somebody's not wearing a mask on the plane or they're acting up. That's actually increased during the pandemic. So even though the traffic's been down, the calls have increased for OPD. That's just the nature of what I see throughout, and it's not just Orlando, it's throughout the country. Probably seen instances where FAA is ratcheting up fines for people that violate the regulations on aircraft. It is becoming an issue and a concern, and if you talk to the flight attendants union, they're very concerned because they take the brunt of this. There's that horrible story that happened on a Southwest flight where a flight attendant had 2 teeth knocked out by one of the passengers. It can get brutal, and I think one of the things that we all try and do at the airport is make sure that we reduce the level of anxiety. So customer service is still a focus as well. And we kept on with the project. We reduced the project, but we have a project that is about a $3 billion project. Actually, it's $2.8 billion with the reduction. But we had, 1,500 to 2,000 people continuing to work out throughout that time. So people were continuing to work. They had to maintain the protocols. They had to wear masks. We had procedures in place. We've got a safety program, I think, that is one of the best because we continue to focus on that. Anytime you go down to the South Terminal, and we're not really open for tours at this point, but I've been down there up until I had some recent surgery, so I haven't been back in about a month. But I'll be going down tomorrow to take a look at it. They're starting to make progress. We're about 75% done with the South Terminal. Before I get into that, let's talk about a little of what's happened. The screen in front of you shows the pre-COVID and the current destination. So you can see from the U.S. destinations, pre-COVID we were at 91, we're now at 89. International destinations don't have any flights from the UK. There are issues that have to be resolved by the national governments on protocols and how people can fly and what restrictions that they're going to have to follow. We did, I'm happy to say, receive our first flight from Frankfurt for Lufthansa 2 weeks ago, and they're continuing to fly 3 days a week. Their loads are down, but they're continuing to fly. What's interesting is the loads on the inbound flight are about 70 or 80 people, and they're flying a Boeing 777. On the outbound flight, people are 200 plus. So people here are wanting to travel to Europe to get to that hub in Frankfurt because our strategy all along has been trying to get to the hubs everywhere, whether it's Dubai, Frankfurt. When the British carriers come back, they're going to be flying into Heathrow for the first time ever. That's a major international hub that presents a lot of connections for us. And then the airlines, we're down. Some of them aren't doing business, but we have 22. Some of them, the major ones, Delta, US, Delta, American, United, Southwest. But there's some new airlines that have started up. One of them is an airline called Breeze. They haven't started in Orlando, but they're scheduled to start. Breeze is owned by a gentleman named David Neeleman. David Neeleman was a co-founder of JetBlue. He also helped found WestJet, which is a Canadian airline. He owns Azul, which is a Brazilian airline that was flying into Orlando until the restrictions were put on in March of 2020. So he knows about business of flying. So he started a new airline, and it's going to be focused on the smaller markets. So they've started in Tampa, but they're not going to be able to ignore that a lot of the folks in the smaller markets want to fly to Orlando because of what we have to offer. So today we're the #1 airport for the most part in the first and second quarter of 2021. Again, that's changing, but that's also because the rest of the country is starting to open up and they're starting to fly. which is good for us. We have a testing facility, a COVID testing facility. I've already mentioned the GBAC certification. We also have a walk-up vaccination site. The state, through FEMA, has set up a site in a storefront that is vacant, the old Kennedy Space Center storefront in their East Hall where the Hyatt Fountain is. And they're doing 60, 70 vaccinations a day walk-up. Some of them, most of them are Johnson & Johnson. You can get Pfizer if you prefer. But the key from our perspective is to increase the safety, and the demand is to make sure that people have an opportunity to get vaccinated. And then we're selling PPE, the personal protective equipment and vending machines. And the concessions, about 85% of them are opening up. Again, they're going to have to contend with some labor shortages, but I think everybody, concession business at Orlando International, wants to open back up, and they're starting to see the traffic come back. So they're going to have to focus and get people back in place so that they can continue their business. So this gives you a little bit of a perspective on our 12-month rolling. This is a comparison between Miami, Tampa. I have to put my glasses on because it's pretty small here. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, and Sanford. So it shows the drop off, and then we've always been the busiest for a couple of years in the state. This is how we compared to the national TSA average. And there's a report that TSA publishes every day that shows departing passengers. But you can see that for a long time, we've performed above the national average. But this is probably the most insightful of all, because the blue-green is where we were in 2019. The red is where we are now. And you can see at one point there was a big, big splotch of blue. And it's starting to diminish. So we've got some work yet to do to come back, and we're focused on that. And I think we're in a good position, but we're going to have to continue to chop the wood to get it done. So what's the future hold? Got new destinations domestically. We've always been a domestic powerhouse: Columbia, South Carolina, Charleston, Fort Myers, Honolulu, Wilmington. As I said, Medellin is added. We've had service to Medellin before with other airlines, but this is a brand new airline. Heathrow. These are some of the other traffic resumptions and new service that we have. So we continue to be a place where you can fly, and people will come from Jacksonville, Tampa, Palm Beach, because we have flights direct to these destinations where you don't have to connect. And connectivity is a big issue. So I understand Brightline, Christine Kiefhopper was here last month speaking to me. They're blowing and going. Go down 528 to the east, you'll see all the construction. You go on the airport, you'll see the construction. So they just hit their 50% mark. They expect to be operating in 2023. That's about a year after we open up. They're planning on opening up our south terminal. But that will give you a connection from Miami to Orlando by train, a 3-hour, 15-minute ride. Continue to work on relationships because the business that we have depends on it. We're looking at low fares. I mean, we've always been a low fare market. That's been a blessing, and it's been a challenge because airlines like to make money. Contrary to pre-2008 recessions, the old adage was, how do you make a small fortune in the airline business? You start with a large one. But the airline executives in the C-suite figured it out in the recession of 2008. What they've done is you've seen mergers and acquisitions. 2005 or 6, you had about 8 airlines. So Continental and United had merged. Northwest and Delta had merged. Southwest acquired AirTran. US Air had merged with America West, and now they've merged with American. So the airlines have consolidated, and they control, those 4 airlines control about 78% of the total capacity in the country in terms of seats, airline seats and flights. So The business aspect of that is they're controlling the supply. You can control the supply and you have a lock on that, then you're going to control to some degree the fares that you can charge. So like everything else, we've seen fares go lower during the pandemic to try and induce people to come back. But I think you can expect going forward, you're going to see them coming back just like you've seen the prices of lumber and a lot of other commodities come back up. So that's another issue that we're going to continue to watch pretty closely. It will affect all of us. This slide's for Mr. Cardinal. The Go OUC partnership. We have, I think, what is a one-of-a-kind partnership with OUC. We, in the South Terminal, we have our power is provided by basically chilled water operation. OUC is expert in managing that. And we have it in the north as well, and we have the maintenance people that have done it in the north. But this is going to be a larger capacity. We're also bringing in a power line as a part of that project to give us redundant power with the 12 kV low line. We don't have the expertise to manage that. We also have a pretty extensive requirement for backup emergency power because power does go out. So we've reached an agreement after a number of years of hard negotiations with OUC to manage all that because they have the expertise. The benefit that we get is reliability. Many of you may remember a couple of years ago that Atlanta lost power. There was a fire in the power vault for Georgia Power outside of Hartsfield Airport. It caught fire. That was the only source of power into the airport. So they were down without power for about 24 hours. If you don't have any power, you can't fly, you can't do anything. And that was a major loss for a lot of people because of just the inability to use that. So we took note of that, and part of our agreement with OUC to reach was to get the redundancy we need and get the response time because this agreement requires a minimum of 30 minutes on a response for any of the outages that we incur. So we think that's a benefit to us, and it's something that we continue to look at as partnerships and leverage the expertise that others have. South Terminal. Number first, I think the one thing I would like you to take away from this is that we're changing the operational profile of airports. Most every airport that you go through these days, including the North Terminal at Orlando International, when you go to pick up your bags, you have to go either to the second floor in our case. Some airports you have to go all the way to the bottom. That's because the baggage systems, by and large, that are prevalent in the U.S. have been conveyor belt, so they're hostage to gravity. We have a new system, new in the U.S. It's been in use in Europe for more than 40 years. It's called a track tub system. So every piece of luggage will go into a tub. There's a radio frequency ID chip underneath so you can track it throughout the process. But you also have a track system that can elevate the baggage. So when you fly in the new South Terminal when it opens, baggage claim is up top. So people that are arriving get the full Monty, if you will. They see the sunlight, you see all the features that we've developed in there. So the experience is going to be that much better. And that's because of the technology of the baggage system allows us to do that. And then you take that, and we've got some technology, some what we call immersive media technology that really will be, I think, state of the art. If any of you've ever flown through the Tom Bradley International Terminal in Los Angeles, you'll know that they've got a lot of these major video screens. So we've taken that concept and put it on steroids so that the experience you get is you're going to see some high-tech videography. It's not going to be of other places. It's going to be of Central Florida. It's going to be things that we know and love in Central Florida. Some of the homes at Dubstred, a rocket launch at Kennedy. They're taking all those, and obviously we're also known for theme parks, but there are a lot of things that all of us who live in Central Florida know and enjoy in addition to what the great leisure activities are. So we're about, Windows in Orlando is an example. My hope is that one day we'll be able to do a live shot on the windows of Orlando, which are large screens when you walk down a concourse, that you'll see the shot live. This is the moment vault, and you'll see some, I have a video that I'm going to run because I know I'm probably running a little bit over, so I'll try and move through this quickly. But these are just some renderings of what we're actually building right now. So let me go to the video. So this is going from north to your left to south. These are a part of the gates that we're building and under construction now. So there are pier systems. So every one of these, you're able to do either international or domestic out of that. So there are loading bridges, and you'll see some example. We've already got a couple of loading bridges, which are the bridges that connect the aircraft to the pier that we've already got out there. So you can put 2 loading bridges off those piers, and so you can make the maximum use of that ramp on the airport or outside of the apron. So this is the major, what we call the palm court, and this is coming from the west toward the east. So that rack that you see there is where this technology, this high definition digital technology is going to be deployed. And it'll be, you'll see all sorts of things, and you'll see screens on the outside and the inside, and they're all coordinated. It's a very high-tech area. This is where you'd be walking out of. This is the prow. That's when you see the airport, you'll see this big prow. I was there when they hoisted the thing. It's pretty impressive. The architect, the conceptual architect that worked with us went to every iconic building in Central Florida to look at the profile and what they look like. So he went to Dr. Phillips, he went to the Convention Center, he went to the Advent Health, and one of the unifying elements of all this was this prow. So we're moving forward. We're about 75% complete. We hope to be complete with the building in February of next year and probably operational in the spring. That's going to be dependent on how we move the airlines around and when they're ready to operate. So I appreciate your attention today. I know it's not a lot of information, and Mr. President, it's up to you whether we take questions or not. The question was, why don't we have direct flights to Asia? Pre-pandemic, we were working on that. We met with the Chinese airlines, we met with Japanese airlines. There is the capability, particularly with the Boeing 787, to do nonstop between Tokyo and Orlando, but it's a long flight, 17 hours. So, as I mentioned earlier, in order for it to be profitable, you have to fill up the front of the plane. So what we have to do is generate demand from the business sector to do that. And that's been a challenge. We've done that in the past. That's how we got the Frankfurt flight, which was back in 2007. Part of the reason we got the Frankfurt flight is we had companies here in Orlando that committed to seats on the Frankfurt flight. And once they got up and running and saw the ability to generate more traffic, then they continued the flight. So Lufthansa's been flying here since 2007. The same issue. It's an economic issue for the airlines. The Japanese in particular are very cautious. So it's been a long effort. My senior director of marketing, Vicki Jaramillo, likes to say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we continue to work on that. I expect that we will try and renew our relations with the Japanese airlines and make the case. But that's basically the reason, economics. Now, the Chinese have been a little bit different. The Chinese have restricted, the central government has restricted flights from airlines, and so it ends up, we have to go through a negotiation with the government. And right now, as you all may know, we don't have the best relations with the Chinese government.
Bill, maybe if we may take one more question, Tommy?
Bill, this is a question that I want to make a statement. Bill has been in public service for 40 years, and retired. Let's hear it, Bill Brown. Bill, I know everything, see, of course, on the airline safety travel, I've read that they were putting in circulates to get somebody else concerned. I know, like you do the counters, they wipe down. Tell us about what the airlines are doing to make it safe to travel.
Well, they've done that. I mean, there have been airflow studies, and there have been a couple. There was one out of Harvard about 6 or 7 months ago. So they understand, because what we've learned as we've gone through this pandemic is that it's transmissible through the air. And so airflow volume is key. So in a place like this, now that we have vaccines, but you have to keep the air moving. So we've done the same thing in the terminal. We made sure that we keep that airflow volume up, because that's what the circulation is, the thing that helps dissipate. That's why you don't have to wear a mask outside, right? Because you've got that volume. The airlines are all focused on that. They're also focused on the cleaning and the protocol. So yeah, it's safe to fly the aircraft.
Let's have a big hand for Phil. Thank you. I'm afraid with you. Okay. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. So now as we close, Phil, thank you again for your presentation and your insights. You clearly had one of the harder jobs the last 15 months than anyone. So since we are a business club, remember, do business with Rotarians, and now for the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, and do, is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? So be safe, be well, be involved, be a Rotarian. We are adjourned.